Thank you for joining us for the webinar today. My name is Joan Popolo, and I'm the Executive Director of Action Innovation Network. Action is a collaborative network of technology business incubators and other entrepreneur support organizations based throughout the greater Boston and New England region. Our network supports startups developing technologies in the industry sectors of the life sciences, clean tech, robotics, ocean, marine, maritime, and advanced materials. So we also provide a suite of resources for international startups that are looking to explore the Boston innovation ecosystem as a place to grow their company in the U.S. One of the activities in that suite is a series of webinars, which is what you're listening to today. This is our second in a series of 5 webinars that we have scheduled for the year on topics of interest to international startups as they look at Boston as a place to grow their business. I want to go over just a few items before we jump into the webinar with Greg Manning. All attendees have had their audio and video muted. The presentation will run for about 45 minutes, leaving about 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end. And I suggest that if you do have a question, you type that into the chat box that you should see, and we will address those at the end of the presentation. The webinar will be recorded and posted on the Action website for future viewing in case you have to jump off or would you like to look at it again later. We will also be providing the presentation slides to all those that are on the webinar. So today's webinar is titled The Power of Your Marketing Collateral for Fundraising and is presented by Greg Mannix. Greg is the VP of International Business Development at Life Science Nation, a consulting firm that helps startups find global and local resources for their success. After graduating from the University of California, he moved to Europe, where he began a career in the life sciences and obtained a master's degree from IE Business School in Madrid. He has extensive experience in sales and marketing management in the medical devices field. He has worked extensively in Europe, North America, and Latin America, and he speaks English, Spanish, and French. Greg's role at LSN is to provide international early-stage companies with the tools and strategies to successfully fundraise and to facilitate cross-border investments, licensing, and M&A transactions. So with that, I will hand it over to Greg to start the presentation.
Thank you very much, Joan. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the invitation to participate today and share my experience on the topic we're going to discuss. I would add, because I think it's relevant to the audience, that the reason I came to Boston was precisely because of a startup in the life sciences and medical device company that was looking to establish operations in the US. And I moved to the greater Boston area to start that project with the company, which is something that a lot of international companies are considering doing. So I have a little bit of experience in that sense, kind of the challenges and the hurdles and all of the resources that are available to help smooth out that project. So today we're going to talk about the importance of your marketing collateral for fundraising. And what I would like to say up front is that I think there are a few takeaways from today's talk that I hope you'll all get out of this webinar. First of all, that there is no holy grail in terms of marketing collateral. Each company is developing a very different type of technology, and the life sciences is a very broad space. So every company's approach will necessarily be different, and that's fine. But there are some basics that should be kept in mind, and I hope that's what we'll be able to transmit today. Another takeaway is that no matter how good your product or technology is, how promising, how disruptive or transformative it might be, if you can't communicate it clearly and effectively, you're lost. You won't get traction where you need it. So it's so important to be able to communicate what you do and what makes your company special. And in my experience, about 80% of companies that I talk to and work with don't transmit everything they need to transmit in their marketing collateral. And these are things that investors in general need to know and need to understand about the project. So I would say 80% of companies are missing important information in their pitches, in their collateral, in their website, etc. So let's just take a quick look. So there are many steps to a successful fundraising campaign, and we're going to concentrate today on step 2, marketing collateral. But I think it's important, before you can create your marketing collateral to transmit your message, you need to assess your own company in a very thorough way. By that, I mean, get your positioning right. What is it that makes your company special? What are the strengths and weaknesses that you want to present? You certainly want to highlight the strengths in a very clear way to investors so that they will get interested in your project. So I think the first step in any fundraising campaign is to take a very deep look at yourself and try to be objective, and bring in third parties who are unfamiliar with your company to give their feedback on what they see as being unique or different. One of the things we do at my company, Life Science Nation, is help companies with this process of fundraising, where they can, read some practical information about the process, and hopefully find it useful and helpful for them. This book, Fundraising Manifesto, is basically what we use as a tool to help companies, and a lot of the teaching activities that we do are based on the information in this book. So anyone who would like a digital copy of this book, please feel free to reach out to me, and I will send that. And you'll find a lot of the information we're going to discuss today in the book. So today we're going to talk about marketing collateral and how important it is to get your message across, to get in front of the investors and strategic partners who may want to invest in your project. Getting them interested in your project is really challenging. We have to be honest. There is a lot of competition for the investment dollars that are out there and available. So you need to be very concise and effective in your branding and messaging. So it's essential to provide potential investors with high quality professional materials. The materials need to engage them. They need to communicate your message clearly and concisely. By concisely, and that's a very important issue, so many times I see that companies who are often run by people with a scientific background and not so much a business background, they want to communicate huge amounts of technical data or scientific information about their product. And I think there's a time and a place for that, and it certainly will come as you go through a process of due diligence with an investor eventually. But very many times I see that the initial correspondence, the initial information that's sent out is too extensive and basically too technical. So we'll talk about what is the really important information that you need to transmit, and what can be kept available for future conversations. And then you need to present that information in a way that helps an investor understand very quickly whether your company might be a fit or not, and whether they want to take a meeting with you. Because that's really the goal of your marketing collateral at this phase, when you start reaching out to new investors and strategic partners. You just want to catch their interest and get that first meeting with them, and then in that first meeting, be able to transmit enough information about your project, and not just about the technology and the science and the product in itself, but about the whole project that you are developing. And if you're able to do that, you will get the meetings, and you will be able to advance with these potential investors. Okay, so building your brand has a lot of steps and a lot of tools. I think it starts with your logo. A logo is important because it visually represents your company, and people tend to remember logos, so it is important. Your tagline is just a very short description of what your company is. And I'm a firm believer that a strong tagline in all of your marketing materials, and even attached to your logo, really helps put your company in context. And we'll look at some examples. An elevator pitch, this is something that everyone talks about, and it's super important. Throughout your fundraising process, you'll have many opportunities to meet an investor or a strategic at a conference, or in some medical meeting, or just anywhere that you might be attending a networking event. And if you are able to, in a few sentences, explain precisely what your company is doing and make it sound compelling and exciting and fantastic, which it is, and you believe it is, and if you can transmit that in a few sentences, you will be able to catch people's attention and possibly exchange cards and set up a future call. And that's what you want to do. Then we recommend a tool that we call a tear sheet, which is basically a one-page summary of your company that has the key facts that investors want to know about what you're doing and where you're at right now. An executive summary is a bit of an extension on that. It tells your story. Of course, the slide deck is extremely important, because this is often the first deep look that an investor will take into your company, and you will be sending this out to a lot of investors to present yourself. So it has to be really good, of course. And then your website is also an important tool that helps give credibility to your project, and should be easily navigable. We'll have a look. And some companies find a short animated video explaining the technology to be useful. And for many investors or strategics who work in different spaces, who are not specialized in an extremely narrow area or indication area type of technology, and there are investors who are extremely specialized, but I would say most investors out there are not so specialized. They work in several areas. They might work in oncology and cardiovascular, and they might do therapeutics, they might do diagnostics, they might do medical devices. They might be working in several fields. So sometimes an animated video is useful to explain in a very visual way how your technology works, not for the experts in the field, but actually for the people who are not experts in the field, who need to understand what your technology does. So those are some of the tools that make up your marketing collateral, and they all have to be coherent. They all have to follow a similar look and feel, and they all have to transmit the same message in different ways and different levels of depth. So a logo, we can start with my company's logo, Life Science Nation. We're about connections. So our logo it's showing connections, kind of roughly taken from a molecular structure. And then our tagline, which goes with our logo, is connecting products, services, and capital. So anyone who sees our logo can immediately understand that we connect people. We connect products, services, and capital. Other logos for different kinds of life science companies hopefully have something to do with, in some way illustrate what the company does. That's not always possible, but I really do think it is useful to connect a tagline to your logo, just to give context to what you do. You don't want to miss out on any opportunity when someone sees your logo for them to understand what kind of company is behind that logo. And if you have a generic name for your company, or something that doesn't describe what your company does, it's very useful to have that tagline there, so that just at a glance, you know what kind of company you're talking about. So what is a tagline? A tagline is just a few words, and a tagline can be really compelling and exciting, or just descriptive, or a tagline can be vague or generalized. So, a couple of examples: inspired innovation really doesn't tell you anything at all about the company. That's completely vague. A unique opportunity in cancer management, same thing. A unique opportunity in what sense? Is it a device? Is it a drug? Is it an IT platform? What is it? Then there are generalized ones like, next generation protein therapeutics. Okay, it gives a little bit of context, but really doesn't describe what the company is doing. So I'm going to show you some real life examples of companies that I've worked with recently. So here's a therapeutics company. It's a biotech company, and their tagline, and this is from their pitch. It's innovate, design, optimize. So I think it's clear that this is a vague tagline. It really doesn't give you any context at all about what this company does. It sounds nice, and I think you have to keep in mind, who is your target audience and what are you looking to achieve? If you want to grab someone's attention, maybe a better description will help you, from this very first slide, hopefully a little bit better description, a little bit better tagline will grab that person's attention and have them continue on to the next slides. So I don't think a tagline of this type is useful for what we are trying to achieve. I think a tagline of this type is more, thinking about trying to sound good, have a modern design, etc. But I think it's a missed opportunity to actually transmit and get someone engaged to continue reading through your presentation. So here's another one that I would call generalized. So it's a diagnostics company, and the tagline is taking the pain out of bladder cancer. So it kind of gives you some context that this company is working in the bladder cancer space, but it doesn't really, taking the pain out of bladder cancer doesn't really describe what the company develops. It's very general. So here again, I think it's a missed opportunity to transmit. You know, if someone is only to see your first slide, this is a missed opportunity because they won't understand what your company does. So what I consider a compelling tagline, one that really helps give context, is a company, this is a medical device company, that says clinical stage biomaterials company reinventing surgery. It sounds good. It's reinventing something which transmits novelty, cutting edge technology, perhaps. You understand what space they're working in. It's surgical closure. What stage of development the company is in. It's a clinical stage company. What do they do? Biomaterials. So in a few words, this company has transmitted in a compelling way what they do. And I think this is a great tagline because together with their logo and the photo, just on this front page of their presentation, you get good context. You know what they do and you know what makes it novel or unique. Another example, this is a biotech company, and their tagline is endogenous regenerative medicine for ophthalmology and beyond. So there again, okay, this is a regenerative medicine company. They're using endogenous regenerative medicine, and their first application is ophthalmology, but apparently the technology can be used for other applications, other indications. So you can read all of that in just a few words. And together with their logo, I think this is also a very good presentation of the company. And right away, an investor who might be interested in that space will want to continue reading. So elevator pitch, I think it kind of speaks for itself, but there are many times when you only have a minute or a few minutes to catch someone's attention. So what I always recommend to people is that they never stop working on their elevator pitch. It can always be improved, updated. You can learn from the results you get when you tell someone about your company and what you do, what their reaction is, what kind of questions they ask you. So it's something that you always need to be working on and thinking about. You need to know it by heart so that in any given situation, you can just immediately tell someone in a few seconds, you know, over a drink or sitting in a coffee shop, what it is you do and what makes your company special. So it's an important part of your marketing collateral, and it should definitely be included in your pitch deck, in your slide deck, because I think, you know, just as it's important, as I said earlier, to give context to what your company does on that first slide, on that title slide, I also think it's important to immediately give a brief description of what your company does, so that and right at the beginning, so that everyone can understand more about your technology and understand whether it's a fit for them or not, and they want to talk further. So I mentioned earlier that there's, I think, an efficient way to transmit the key facts about your company, not the detail, but the key facts, is what we call a tear sheet. And here are two examples of tear sheets. The content isn't important. What is important is that you have a sidebar in blue with some key points that have to do with what sector the company is in, who's on the management team. And it doesn't have to be the same for every company. You'll see that the two examples are different. It depends on what you want to highlight. But I think key facts that all investors want to see right up front is how much money have you raised? Have you received grants? Have you received prizes? Have you received seed funding? Have you raised a Series A? How much did you raise? Whatever, and how much money you're raising. And that's really important because, and some people don't realize this, but most investors have a very clear mandate of the size of raise that they are looking, the size of investment that they're looking to make. So there's a clear mandate to raise, to invest a minimum of, say, $5 million in a company. And that is, that's their mandate. They have to look for investment opportunities between $5 and $10 million. If you're raising $500,000, don't talk to them because it's not a fit. They won't participate in a $500,000 seed round. So in order to not waste anybody's time, your time or their time, put that on your material. Explain how much money you're raising and for what. Because this will weed out investors who are clearly not a fit for you. Other things like intellectual property, whatever you want to, maybe your regulatory status, whatever you think are the key information points can go on that blue sidebar. And then in the main text on the right-hand side of the tear sheet, you can have your executive summary, which will be similar to your elevator pitch, giving a brief explanation. You may want to show what your pipeline of products is, or not. It depends, what you're wanting to communicate here. You may want to communicate key milestones or data points that you have already achieved, things like that. So a data sheet is a very useful tool. We think that this is a very good tool to send to investors with your initial outreach, this data sheet, and your non-confidential investor deck, which we'll talk about now. So the executive summary is just an extension of your data sheet in a more detailed format, where you can, in 1 or 2 pages, and I think it's good to have a 2-page executive summary that some people will ask for. You can use the tear sheet as a 1-page document. If an investor says, "Send me a 1-page executive summary," the tear sheet is a good format for that. A 2-page executive summary can go into a bit more detail. It can tell the story in more with a little more text. So let's talk about the slide deck. This is probably your most important tool for getting your message across. You will be using this as a tool to send out to companies, to send out to investors and strategics that you want to communicate with. You will also be using this in pitch competitions. Possibly you might be using it in your initial investor meeting when you sit down with people. So it's a really important tool for you, and you need to put a lot of thought into this. And as I mentioned earlier, I would say about 80% of the companies that I've worked with and that we work with here at Life Science Nation, just to give you a little context, we run what we call an innovation challenge at each one of our conferences. We do the conference 5 or 6 times a year. It's an investor conference. And we get about 100 to 120 applications for each conference. And in each application, we evaluate the marketing collateral, the details in their application, and several other parts of the application. So a lot of companies come through our process of evaluation. So, and I would say about 80% of the materials that we receive, the pitch decks that we receive, are missing some crucial data. And what I would ask you as we talk about this today, I would ask you to think about whether your pitch has all of this information in it or not. So we looked at the cover page and we looked at some actual examples of a cover page of a pitch deck, and we saw, some of them had a photo, a logo, a tagline, and the contact information. I think that's a great opportunity to get people interested enough to go on and read the rest of the presentation. So you don't want to miss out on that opportunity. Then in the rest of the slides, which should never be more than 15 slides, I don't think, for that initial investor deck. And I've seen companies send investors a 30 or 40 slide deck initially. So I think it's important to keep it short. And the order that you put the information in is really up to you. This is just a suggestion, but I think the important thing, and what I would like you to remember from today's webinar, is that all of these data points, all of these areas are important for most investors. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, that it's good to start with your elevator pitch, which is just a short summary of your project, your company, your technology. In a few lines. Start with a brief summary of what you do, the elevator pitch, and then somehow you want to express what your current status is, which means how much money have you raised so far, what stage of development are you in, etc. How much are you currently raising? So this is such an important data point, and I'm really surprised by how many companies don't offer this information in their slide deck. And as I said earlier, I think this is one of the key information points that investors need to know to evaluate if your company is a fit for them or not, because they have a mandate and they're looking for companies that are raising a certain amount of money. So you need to clearly state that, how much money you're raising and what that money will be for. Is it to complete your phase 1 trial? Is it to do a clinical validation trial? Is it to fund your regulatory pathway? Whatever. But you need to make that clear. And it doesn't have to be on the first slide. It can be towards the end. Like I said, the order doesn't really matter. But I think it does matter that these are important data points that an investor needs to know. Unmet needs and commercial opportunities. This is about talking about the market. What market are you addressing? You need to explain what the market is, how big the market is, what's the opportunity there. Every investor will want to know, what market are you addressing? And then in green, this is talking about your technology. And this is not necessarily 3 slides, it might be 6 slides, but it shouldn't be 25 slides to talk about your technology. It's not the time or the place to go into such detail. And the important thing here is to highlight the key points without going into too much detail. What is the origin of your technology? Many people don't talk about that, and I think it's important. Who invented your technology, or where did it come from? If it's coming out of a university lab, mention that. People want to know, where did this come from? How did it come about? A description. If you have IP, I think it's very useful to have a differentiation from your competitor's slide, showing your strengths and weaknesses, perhaps, if you can do that. Not everybody can. It depends on the technology. any validation and supporting data that you have. You don't want to give all the data. You just want to summarize what data you have. Say you have 3 publications supporting your technology, and you want to mention those publications, but not go into all the detail. So, I mean, in each case, there may be a different approach. Sometimes you will want to put up some graphs showing that data. That's fine. But as I said earlier, you don't want your presentation to go longer than 14, 15 slides at the most, and certainly not upwards of 25 to 50 slides or more. So you do want, the bulk of your presentation will be about your technology and what makes it special. That's clear. But there are some other points that you can add. So in blue, it's optional. If you do have a pipeline of products, you may want to mention it towards the end of the presentation. And if you are able to assess risks and risk mitigation involved with your technology, that would be great too. That adds value. If you're not able to, then don't put it in. That's clear. In terms of product pipeline, I would say that I think it's more effective in reaching out to investors to focus on a particular indication or application of your product, one application, one indication, because this allows you to discuss what the market is, what the competitor situation is, etc. If you are developing a platform technology that allows uses in many different indications, that can make your story much more complicated. So I think it's probably a good idea to find your best application and best indication and focus on that for the bulk of your presentation. And then at the end, you can say, and we're also, the technology will also be valid for these other indications, and this is our pipeline. That's fine. Then extremely important is the management team and scientific advisory board or board of directors and/or whatever adds value to your argument. No investor will invest in a technology on its own. The investor is investing in people, in a team that's developing a technology that is a fit for them and that has a compelling story and looks promising and has a lot of other elements, of course. But without a team behind it, there will be no interest from any investor. So it's very important to highlight the management team and the people who are key to the organization. So it might be the scientific advisory board. In some cases, it might be the board of directors, where you have key people who are experienced and who have done this before. So this is an important point because many of the startup companies that we see are run by first-time entrepreneurs, and that's fantastic. I love to see it. I love to see the energy and the enthusiasm, and people going out on a limb and taking a risk to set up a company, etc. And that's fantastic. But when that's the case, it's important to complement your team with experienced people, and that's what you want to transmit when you talk about your team in your pitch deck to investors. So if the CEO is a first-time entrepreneur who hasn't done this before, that's fine. Explain what the background of the management team is, what their scientific or technical expertise is. All of that is really important, but it's also important to show that you have people either on your scientific advisory board or your board of directors that complement that lack of experience with experience of their own. So if the CEO doesn't have experience starting a company and bringing it to an exit, it's really helpful if you can show that you have someone on your team, and that could be your board, who does have that experience. So that is, I think these are the key points that need to be in your presentation. I know it's extremely challenging to squeeze that into 10 to 12 slides, and it's also not a good idea to try to pack so much information in a slide that it's unreadable. But if you can manage to create a compelling 12-slide pitch deck for investors that includes all of these points, then you will be very successful in getting your message across. So please take a look at your own pitch deck. Ask yourself, am I transmitting all of this information that investors want to see, or am I missing some key points? And I think you will find, when you ask yourself those questions, that that you need to think more deeply about what you include here and add some additional key points of information. So this is an evolving and never-ending project. Your pitch deck will be changing continuously. You'll get feedback. You'll find that certain parts of your pitch deck are not working with investors and with strategic people who you're talking to. You'll find that other parts are working, and you might want to expand on those. But I mean, ask yourself if you're really giving a complete picture when you send this out. Finally, I want to talk about a little bit about an effective way of explaining what your funding status is and what you're seeking to achieve. Because I also find that this is a place where many companies don't communicate clearly what the timeline of milestones and what the use of funds is going to be. So just very quickly, this is a company that has explained with this slide how much money they've raised so far, which I think is it's pretty good. They got some grant money, they got some seed capital, they're already producing some revenue. It was a biotech company. So I mean, this is very useful information for an investor to see because this is a validation of the company and the technology. So definitely highlight the money that you've raised and how you've raised it if that adds to your story. And then this is the way a company is explaining how much money they're raising and what the money is going to be used for. What's the use of funds? And I don't think this is a very good example. I don't think this is a very effective way. So they're raising $2 million, but the description of what they're going to do with the money is very vague. They're going to accelerate, scale, and expand. It really doesn't give a clear picture. And I would also say that it doesn't give any sense of timeline. Is this going to happen in 6 months? Is it going to happen in 3 years? You have no idea. So here is another company's way of communicating how much money they're raising and what the use of funds is going to be. And I think this is better than the previous company's approach. It says how much money they're raising. It explains pretty clearly what the use of funds is going to be. You can see in the description below, it shows how much money is going to each area. R&D support, payments for IP, different working capital, etc. It gives a little bit of an idea of timeline. But I also don't think this is the most effective approach. Here is another company's approach where they break down their investment into 2 phases, which is great. So it's showing that first they need to raise $750,000 that will last them for 9 months, and they're going to achieve these milestones. So that's great. This is a medical device company. It's pretty clear. Then they're going to go on to raise their Series A, which will last from 12 to 18 months, and they're going to achieve these other milestones. So this is actually pretty clear. I think it's not bad. I think an investor will clearly understand where this company is heading and how much money they're going to need. So that's pretty good. But I think the most efficient way to explain the use of funds and the timeline to milestones is this Gantt chart. Not this particular Gantt chart. This is for one diagnostics company, but a Gantt chart in general will show. In this case, I think it's also very good because they show how much money they've raised to date, what milestones they've achieved, what activities they've carried out with that money that's been raised to date. They show how much money they're raising moving forward and what the use of those funds is going to be and the timeline. So I think this is a really effective way to communicate to investors how you're going to use the money and what milestones they can expect to see you reach with their investment. And it's a very clear way of communicating that. So, each company has to do their own thing and figure out the way they want to communicate their need for funding and the use of funds. But I think this is an effective way to do it. And finally, we're not going to go into any detail about the website, but again, I think it's extremely important on your front page of your website, on your home page, to have, of course, your logo and your tagline that gives context. Perhaps a short description of your company, an elevator pitch. So many companies don't have this on their website, and you have to navigate through the website to understand what the company does. And to be honest, I was looking at a company yesterday, and after 5 minutes navigating around their website, I still couldn't figure out what the company did. It was very vague, and just there was no clear explanation anywhere of what the technology does. So think about who your audience is. Your audience is not necessarily experts in your field. Your audience should be anyone who's interested in your technology, in your company, investors, strategics, potential buyers of your technology. So you want your communication to be so self-explanatory that anyone can understand what it is you do. And then on your website, just like in your pitch deck, you want to highlight your strengths, the strengths of your company. So if one of your strengths is your team, because you have an experienced CEO who's done this before and is an expert in the field, or the rest of the team, then put that right up front on the front page. That is the strength of your company. Highlight that. If the strength is your science or the origin of your technology, if it came out of a prestigious university, then maybe that's what you want to highlight on your front page. But you just want to make sure that everything is easy to identify, easy to navigate your website, so that people can identify that information. So that is what I wanted to communicate today. Those are the things I wanted to talk about, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Greg, I have a question. Well, first of all, thank you for that great presentation. I appreciate you providing the discrete and real-life examples, both effective and not so effective, that companies make. in regards to taglines and tear sheets and funding and investment progress. So thank you for that. I would ask, so once a company presents this to an investor, and if the investor is interested in moving forward with that company, what sort of information would a company expect that the investor will request from them next?
Yes, absolutely. Good question. Thanks, Joan. So I think it's important to keep the initial presentation short and not too much detail. And if the investor is at all interested, they will want more detail on the technology and the science, maybe on the management team or some other things, but especially on the technology itself. So what I recommend to people when they have an initial meeting with an investor, so obviously when you send out your pitch deck to an investor in an email, you want it to be short and concise, etc. When you go into a meeting with an investor, like at a conference, you want to have the same pitch deck, but have a lot of backup slides to answer any question that might come up. And many of those questions will be about the technical part or the science behind the technology. So investors will often ask for more detailed information on the validation of that technology. And then, when if a company goes into due diligence with an investor, then of course it will be under a CDA. It'll be confidential, and then the investor can ask for detailed information about patents, about the technology, about the science. Then it can be anything. But I would say probably the most frequent request for further information will be about the science and the technology, and that's great because that means you were able to get the point across that this is something that's really interesting and potentially a great investment opportunity for the investor. So they're asking for more information.
Thank you. And we did have a question come in from Michael Hansen. And Michael asks, what level of current or projected business financials should be included in the pitch deck?
Mm-hmm. So you'll see that I didn't include that in the key topics there. I don't think that is something you need to include in an initial investor deck. So a pitch deck that's going out to investors that you're meeting, that you're either reaching out to for the first time or you are having an initial meeting with at a conference, I don't think the financials are the key point and shouldn't be included. And the reason is most startup companies in life sciences that are early stage fundraisers, they're pre-revenue. And of course you will make projections on how big is the market and what market share you think you can achieve over the years, and you will have some projections that you might want to have in backup slides, but I would never send those out in an initial mailing to an investor who you haven't spoken to. I think that, like the more complete scientific or technical data that might be requested, financial projections might be something that an investor will ask for in the future. But normally that's not their immediate point of interest. They want to know about the technology, about the opportunity, about the team behind it. If an investor makes an investment into a company, many of them will take a seat on the board, and then they will want to be very involved in the financials of the company. There's no doubt. But in this initial approach, I don't think it's necessary.
Okay. One more question I think we have time for. You made some good points during the presentation on best fit investors, especially around the kind of money they have to invest and what the company should look for. What other things should a startup company be concerned with in choosing an investor, if they're so lucky as to have a couple of investors interested?
Yep.
Is there anything sort of important about investors from different regions of the world who are looking at them, or do you have any other comments on investor fit?
Yes, that's also a great question, and it comes up frequently, that companies are looking to raise money, and they're usually trying to answer investors' questions as thoroughly as possible in their marketing collateral, etc. But I always recommend that companies, when going into a meeting with an investor, they should have their own questions for the investor, and that's something that most people don't think to do, because they think it's all about them getting grilled by the investor, which is part of the process for sure. But I think companies should ask investors really relevant questions, like if it's a venture capital fund, what is the vintage of that fund? And that will give you, when was the fund raised? Because that will give you an idea of what the investors' exit expectations are. If the fund has a vintage of more than 3 or 4 years ago, then their timeline for exit is probably much shorter, and that might not be a fit for you. So it's a relevant question for you as a entrepreneur, or as a CEO, to ask the investor, what is your exit expectation? Are you looking to exit in 3 years or 4 years, or are you in it for a longer term? And then there are many other things about what the investor can add, what value the investor can add to the project. And I think that's a very relevant question for someone to ask. Okay, do you have any expertise in my field? Do you have connections that will be useful for our project, like key opinion leaders or other companies that are complementary, etc.? If you will take a seat on our board, what value will you add? Also, you can ask, do you plan to take a seat on the board or not? And if they do, then it's important that you have good chemistry with that investor. So those are some of the things that will help companies determine whether an investor is a fit for them.
All good points. So thank you for all of that, Greg. We're going to have to wrap it up now. Just a few points to make to wrap it up. I hope everyone found this informative, and look to our next webinar in September, on September 17th, same time again, 9 a.m. Eastern. The topic on that day is going to be Massachusetts employment issues for foreign employers, and it's going to be presented by Brian Mullen, who's an attorney at Bowditch & Dowie, as a law firm here in the Boston area. You'll find a registration link on our website for this, and I hope you look to our website for other offerings that we have. I would like to mention that we do offer a pre-landing program for international startups that are ready to initiate an expansion in the U.S. or who wish to leverage the knowledge and resources in the area to generate new business opportunities here. Again, look to our website for all of this. And as I said in the beginning, we will be sending you a link to the recording of this webinar as well as the presentation slides. So thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.